Hello, Jon from the Lib Dem Podcast here. We are delighted to say that this episode is sponsored by Praetor Reigns. Now more than ever, you need a professional-looking online presence and website. Praetor Reigns have been helping Liberal Democrat campaigns succeed for 18 years. Their Lib Dem Foci package combines a website, social media and email system to help Lib Dems win. You'll receive great support from real people, fair pricing and a huge range of features to choose from. Praetor Reigns are already the bespoke developers for Lighthouse, Lib Dem Draw Online and the LD Directory. They combine a talented system design with an unrivaled understanding of our party, our data and our systems. To find out more, check out the Praetor Reigns website at praetorreigns.co.uk/liberal-democrats. Now, on with the podcast.
Those who are subject to another's power rise to meet the challenge of power in their own hands and then be unbelieving at what they're able to do. It's just like those words. That is what, to me, liberalism is believing in people. Democracy is power in people's hands. Like, that is who we are. And so if we go out there and we invite people in and say, let's do this together, like, I think we could create something spectacular.
Hello and welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast. My name is John Potter and we're going to start a series of podcasts talking about what's happened in the last year, looking forward to next year and all the things that have happened throughout the country really, and how we move on from what has been an interesting year, can we say, about 2020. Some people would use far more stronger adjectives than that. But joining us today is that I'm really excited, is Jon Alexander, who has written a fantastic report for the Social Liberal Forum called Citizens Britain, along with other podcast hosts we've had in the past, Ian Cairn. So welcome to the podcast, Jon.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm in full elf mode, mainly because I'm jealous of your background and Monica's background. So.
Yeah, see, we thought no hats, Monica. See, we don't want to look silly, do we, Monica? That's
that's a strategic choice, John.
And also joining us is the fantastic Monica Harding. Those who don't know, Monica was our brilliant candidate who came so close, 2,700 votes, was it, Monica, to getting rid of Dominic Raab in last year's general election. So who else could we get to talk about things that have happened this year and moving forward to an exciting future? Welcome to the podcast, Monica.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
And shall we start with you, actually, Monica? We'll start because obviously 2019 ended with massive disappointment for yourself. So what has 2020 been like for you? What has been your summary of 2020?
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
what a year.
This is going to be a long podcast. I realise maybe I should have been a bit more succinct. But building from 2019, what have you kind of been building towards?
Well, look, 2019 was a disappointment. However, we've got to look about where we came from. So we weren't a target seat at the beginning of 2019. Most people thought I was mad taking on Dominic Raab's majority of 23,000. So the way it ended, it actually was on a very good note. It was on a high. I mean, as you said, we squeezed his majority down to just over 2,000 from 23,000. We got the biggest swing in the country, and we held him to account. And I think that was a great way to end 2019. To put Dominic Raab on notice and create a marginal seat in what was one of the safest Conservative seats in the country. So, of course, we were disappointed not to get it over the line. But looking forward, we've got the May elections, obviously postponed. For us, it's a triple whammy. We've got the police commissioner elections, we've got the borough elections, and we've got the Surrey County Council elections. And there's tremendous opportunity, I would say an even better opportunity in 2021 than would have been in 2020 to do some real damage to the Conservative Party here. We've not only got Brexit and everything that goes with that, which is, we're gritting our teeth to see what will happen at the end of this year. But of course, we've got the pandemic, and what's shown up there is the complete incompetence of the government. So there's a lot to fight for. We think we can make some fantastic gains. When I look back in 2019 and what we did during the general election campaign, we knocked on 70% of doors in the constituency. Now that's a brilliant feat, and we're so far ahead of the other parties in the constituency. So I think we've got a real opportunity.
And
I think it's interesting to look back, and I'm going to take the hat off because now we're in serious conversation. But I might come back later, you never know. But the thinking about what happened in Izhev in the context of the wider country, it's a really good microcosm in a lot of ways. That the story of our election as the Liberal Democrats being one where you go like, it was incredibly disappointing and very painful for an awful lot of us, and I was out there as well in slightly different ways. But the fact is that the vote percentage went up. That we converted an awful lot of seats that from being ones where we weren't remotely competitive into true kind of target potential, and got ourselves in some really important fights for the sake of the country. And that's really what Ian and I wrote about in Winning for Britain, the report we published earlier this year. And as long as we stare at that sort of moment with clear eyes and stare at the mistakes that were made, because there were some pretty significant mistakes, but don't ignore the kind of the very powerful base that we're building from, and understand the value of that as we go into 2021 and as we've worked through this year. I mean, I've seen in my constituency, Sevenoaks, the energy that was carried over from the year before, and the deep commitment of Liberal Democrats to being part of their communities in a time like this gives us such a powerful platform going into 2021 to really make a difference for the sake of the country.
And we've talked about this on the pod before, just how important 2021 is, not just for the Scottish and Welsh elections and the London Mayor only, but across the country. It's a chance to change the narrative. This will be the first test of Boris Johnson's government where we can say, and particularly, you've got to remember as well, the 2017 county elections, of which I got elected as well, was a really high mark for the Tories. There'll be a lot of Tory county councils and county councillors thinking, we have now got a government that doesn't seem to grasp detail, and they are now getting found out. And so, absolutely right, Jon. This is a real chance to change it and make massive gains if we can. But it takes work. And I think what, Monica, you just said about, the knocking on 70% of doors, obviously that's been curtailed slightly with coronavirus, but that data is key. If you've worked hard, you have that data and you are able to then get successes from it.
I think that's right. I think also, I mean, remember in Easham Walton, we got 28,000 votes. Now, those are people that didn't wake up, on December the 13th thinking, gosh, I wish I'd voted Tory. In fact, I would say there are a few more that woke up and thought, I wish I'd voted Lib Dem, because for us here, the big clincher was Jeremy Corbyn. A lot of people feared Jeremy Corbyn getting in. And then, when it showed that the Conservative Party had a landslide, they wished they'd voted another way. But another really important point, I think, is that we managed to get turnout to 80% of the vote. Now, 80% of the electorate, sorry. So I think what is really important is that when we think about, and people talk about democracy dying and being dead, actually democracy is really alive and well. People want to have their voices heard and say something, and look at the marches for the people's vote, etc., etc. So what we need to do is tap into that and make sure that we are providing the answers that the electorate need.
This podcast has been sponsored by the Katora Coffee Club, the UK's most environmentally friendly coffee club. There are over 400 independent roasters in the UK, each one crafting coffee in their own unique style. Katora Coffee Club works with some of the best to take you on a voyage of coffee discovery. The Katora Coffee Club delivers ethically sourced and independently roast coffee directly to your door. Each month you'll receive between 2 and 4 bags of coffee and their monthly extract magazine. With Christmas around the corner, their gift boxes are a perfect present for the coffee lovers in your life. Even better for LibDem Podcast listeners, use the code BETTERCOFFEE to save 5% on subscriptions and gift boxes for a limited time only. They also have a number of V60 gift sets worth £8 to give away. All Katora Coffee Club boxes are carbon negative and offset the CO2. So why not do some good, enjoy some great coffee, and check out the website www.katoracoffeeclub.com. Now, back to the podcast. Jon, that leads perfect to your report with Ian that you did on Citizens Britain. So do you want to just brief us on that? Talk about, and it's people can go to the Social Liberal Forum. You have put links to it. So give us a little appraisal of it.
Yeah, so I mean, Citizens Britain is really an argument that that there is a potential narrative available for a political party in this country, and we stayed a step away from the Lib Dems, really, not because we don't think that it's a Liberal Democrat narrative, but just because we think it's such a huge opportunity that just describing it as our parties felt sort of too limiting in a way. But really, there's this huge opportunity to say there is a different way politics can be done, and not just to say that, but actually to paint it, to say, like, at the moment we have a politics where the governing party seems to believe that the will of the people is expressed purely through the executive, that the executive that has been elected is therefore whatever they want to do is equated with the will of the people. The way to solve the problems of the country is to put all the power into the hands of that executive, and that narrative is very difficult to challenge and seems to get adopted very widely. I mean, we've seen on things like Marb the kind of the acceptance of that narrative and challenging opposition politicians from that perspective. And so what we wanted to do was actually find a way of evidencing that there's something else going on. There's a different way. And so what we did basically was we defined this. We got to a statement that defined an approach to politics, or created a proxy statement. So we said there's subject politics, which is where the executive has power, and the way to solve the problems of the country is to give government whatever power it needs. And then we defined a sort of a consumer politics, which was the way to solve the problems of this country is to let businesses and consumers do whatever they want. And then we defined a citizen politics. And the statement we used for that was the best way to solve the problems of this country is to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to have their voice heard, in an almost exact quote from Monica Harding. But the idea was, in the polling research that we did, we forced the choice between those statements. So we put up subject versus consumer politics, we put up consumer versus citizen, and citizen versus subject. And aggregating those results, what we found was that there's a huge hunger for a politics based in everyone having their voice heard, a politics based that points towards participation, that points towards getting the ideas and energy and resources of everyone in the country directly involved in contributing to the understanding of what we should do. And that's such a stark difference from where we're going and what's in charge at the moment, and that the mandate that Johnson and his cronies, frankly, have painted themselves as holding. And what we added to that in the report was positioning that with that insight, that significant proportion of the population, that far greater proportion that wants that sense of working together, listening to one another, in the liberal tradition and also in an international moment. So in the liberal tradition, we positioned it by talking about what the ideas of citizenship that are out there at the moment are. So you can think of citizenship as a legalized status, and that arguably is how Priti Patel would want to frame it. Like, you either have citizenship or not. Or, and this I think is the liberal tradition, you can think of citizenship as a practice. You can think of being a citizen, doing the things that citizens do, as we've seen so many people across the country actually want to do, that mutual aid moment and so forth. And you can think of and demand that the idea of the citizen be understood in that way. And then the final thing, as I say, was positioning in this international moment, where if you look around the world, actually, there's hugely inspiring and exciting moments of this kind of politics where people really do have their voices heard, and where government at all levels sees itself as an enabler and a facilitator of that energy and those ideas and those resources, rather than seeing itself as a sort of command and control centralizer. And fascinatingly, those countries where that's been most embraced are the places really where coronavirus has been dealt with best. So particularly Taiwan is a case study we talk about in the report, where actually even now, despite having their first case on January the 20th, despite being only 80 miles off the coast of China, despite having extensive trading links with Wuhan, the way they have responded by making it feel like a genuine kind of national shared team response. They've managed to keep their case count, you're not going to believe this, to 451, I think it is, 451 cases and 7 deaths. 7. And this was the model that New Zealand copied. So I'll stop going because I get very excited about this stuff. But the opportunity to say, look, here is a narrative, and it's so difficult. The point about these narratives is that when one gets established, it's almost like a kind of train track for thinking. It's like you almost can't see things outside of it. So the opportunity and the challenge for us to go, no, there's a very different way to see this moment in time. And if we can do that, and I think this thing about citizenship is so integral to who we are as a party, that it could unlock so much. And it is rooted in what people like Monica and others, and you, Jon, I know, and others across the country have already been doing.
Monica, do you want to, I mean, it's very interesting because I read your study and it was very interesting because for someone, I haven't traveled massively widely, but I have been to Taipei and I have been to Reykjavik. So 2 of the places you actually quote. So I'll get my thoughts on it. But Monica, what are your thoughts about, because I mean, we always talk about, you know, the 3 pillars of winning elections and making changes: money, manpower and data. But in order to do that, you have to get people energized to be that manpower. And is that what we're missing slightly? And you think of what, you know, Stacey Abrams has done in Georgia, etc., to overturn there, that it's actually giving people a stake in actually something good going forward.
I think that's right, but also I think, in talking about the politics of the time, and particularly our lessons from America, what happened with Biden is that he wasn't elected because he was Joe Biden. He was elected because there was a coalition of people that wanted to fight against something, that other. And we did very much the same thing here in Eastern Walton. I'm not sure, and this is controversial, that I did so well because I was a Liberal Democrat, but I did well because I was forming a coalition of moderates against what was a very right-wing Brexiteer. Now, I think we have to kind of recognise that this consensus politics, something, you know, that Stacey Abrams and others did in America, and the Lincoln Project, you know, fashioned in America, that consensus is a very liberal idea, and it's something that we need to bring over here as well. But I think what is exciting about what Jon says is that, you know, I've been puzzled for, you know, so long about why local elections don't get the electorate out, and you're getting such small numbers, when if you think about, you know, the county councils, what they're responsible for, public health, you know, the theme of the moment, adult social care, another theme of the moment, education, and yet we are not getting enough people out to vote. So yes, we need more participation in the polls. And what is exciting about what Jon is saying is that comes from a narrative and a vision. And that's what the whole country is crying out for at the moment, is a vision forward and some leadership forward. And if that vision is rooted in citizenship, you know, it's a fantastic titular kind of totemic thing that we can all get behind.
And if you look at any seat, whether that's a council seat, a county seat, or going up to a parliamentary, you notice it. If it's a closer race, then it tends to get better turnout. And if you work in there, like, so you see it in Preston, that in a local election, you can see turnout dropping to maybe down to like 20% in some you know, wards that have been Labour since, you know, over a century or something like that, compared to other wards where they're getting, okay, it's still not great, getting up to what, 50%, but in a local election, that difference is huge. And you can see it's a direct correlation on how much work is being done by the political parties, usually us. I'd put yeah. And so that's, it's really important to get that vote out. But
I think, Jon, if I could just come in quickly, I think there is something that speaks to this thing about what we think local elections are as well, and what we think elections are, frankly. Like, elections have become, in what I would call consumer politics, elections have become a kind of a contest where the parties sell themselves to people, and the role people have is to make a choice between options. And as Monica says, like, we're getting to a point where that in itself is becoming more energized, because more people are realizing that actually one of those options is incredibly dangerous. Like, we shouldn't beat about the bush. Like, this, if we lose, if the next general election is won by the Conservatives, I think we're well on the way to sort of authoritarian state status. Like, it's a really dangerous situation. And I think that is energizing even that form of politics. But there is in citizen politics, like the idea that actually you're involving people. There's a wonderful proverb that I think was quoted by Benjamin Franklin, which is tell me and I will forget, show me and I might remember, involve me and I'll understand. And it's that sort of that thing of like, if Liberal Democrats at our best, and this goes back to the community politics in the 60s, 70s, 80s, that at our best, we're the party that says, let's do, like, that doesn't say, I will do this for you. It says, let's do this together. And that, I think, that in itself, with this sort of following wind of this greater energy in politics and this greater recognition of the importance of it, if you add in that sense of, no, we're going to go out and we're going to ask you what you want to do and how we can help, how we can stand beside you and stand with you rather than pitch ourselves to you, I think we could really, and it's almost exciting to me that we have these sort of, these three years or so of local elections to really build that momentum. But if we can do it in that way, I think like that idea that people, I would say the greater barrier to turnout in local democracy isn't so much that people see it as unimportant, it's that people see their role as non-meaningful. And I think that's something we can genuinely change. And
is that because governments of all stripes, right, you know, including the coalition years, pretty much downplayed local government? You know, I've been a councillor for 10 years now, and all governments have kind of belittled and taken power away from local government. So if that's the case, then why would people want to invest in that? Why they don't see what tangible, other than like the bins being emptied?
I think that's absolutely right, Jon. And I think we have to do something as a party, increasing that knowledge of what your council, your local council, your borough council, or your county council, or your metropolitan council, whatever, is doing for you, and where your money is going. And this is the other thing that I've never been able to get my head around. You know, we talk about tax rises ad infinitum. Are the Tories going to put taxes up? Are they going to put them down, etc., etc.? But our council taxes are going up pretty much every year and are about to go up by 5%. Who's talking about that? What is that all about? So we have to somehow bridge that gap between the voter and local elections and national politics. There's an analogy that I sometimes use at the school that my children are at, the primary school. You know, that the parental body is about 500 or so strong. And there are 100 people that do everything, from the Parent Teachers Association to, you know, to putting the marquee out for the summer fair. It's the same 100 people again and again. If we're involving them in local politics, they need to create the narrative that gets the rest of the voters and the electorate over the line. And we said this during the general election again and again. You know, the average person in a general election campaign thinks about politics for 2 minutes a week. Mm-hmm. That's it. And that's the only amount of time that they can get a slogan. Yeah. You know, so we have to do better at that at local elections too. We have to have a narrative that involves and excites the electorate and makes them feel, as you say, that they are making a difference to some hugely important topics.
It's so interesting that. It's so interesting. It's the sort of because I'm a real kind of yes and guy in this stuff, and as you know, I was involved just the other night, as well as Citizens Britain and the Winning for Britain report. I was involved in the publishing of a report called Power and Persuasion, which was about how the Conservative Party did their digital campaigning last year. It was published by Valent Projects in partnership with Compass and ourselves and Labour together, actually, which is again interesting, like the sort of the growing of this cross-party thing. But what Power and Persuasion was one of the key, that's really about the tactics. That's the sort of, that report is about, well, I guess, I don't know. What I'm saying really, I think, is that yes, we have to start from where people are. And what that means is that you do have that tiny moment and that tiny window, and that clarity of narrative and frame is essential. And so one of the key findings in that Power and Persuasion report was about how actually that for all that Get Brexit Done as a line emerged in the last 3-4 months. They had it by September, I think. The strategy that they pursued, the underlying kind of move on from Brexit and deal with and look at police, nurses, etc., had been set. That strategic narrative was decided actually immediately after. It was actually available to Theresa May in 2017, but she didn't use it. And so that understanding of that narrative is really key, so that if you do just have that sort of 90 seconds, 2 minutes that someone's prepared to think or is going to actually actively devote themselves to thinking about it, then that lands and that shapes how they see the whole thing. And I think for the Liberal Democrats, it's also true in particular that our aim might be to make that 2 minutes 2.5 by inviting people into thinking about it, by giving them more of a sense they have a meaningful stake. So I think it's sort of both are true, like accepting the limitations and working with that to understand the challenge that we have to provide a way of thinking about things, not just sorry, Monica, go.
No, but just to underline that, it's a different way of fighting an election. So if newspaper reports are to be believed, Farage's new Reform Party is going to stand candidates in every seat where there is a threat of more cycle lanes. Now, hang on a minute, this is a different fight. This is no longer about potholes. This is about cycle lanes and resisting cycle lanes. So there is something much more interesting, menacing going on here, but we cannot be on the back foot. We cannot be, ready, not ready for the onslaught if this happens, of the Reform Party, suddenly coming up with, reclaim our streets or take back control of our highways, and then be busy talking about something else. So that research or not, I'm not sure what the Reform Party are doing, but whatever they're doing, we need to replicate in some way, but be further ahead of that and understand where the electorate are coming from, and actually not make such a difference or think that there is such a difference between how people perceive national politics and local politics. They want to vote for something. They want to vote for an idea. They want to vote for a brand, and they want to vote for values. And we need to make sure in all our messaging that those come across.
And I think because the main beneficiary of apathy is the Tory party. If voters is suppressed, they know, the Tories know they have a block vote, they'll always get that vote more or less, and they can win in that way. And you can see it through even now, as we're talking, things like we'll know about the planning reforms. What you talk about, what people care about locally. One of the few things you actually get a lot of interest in locally is planning, of which the Tories are hoping to remove that completely. Or in other issues where they say, actually, we've invested X amount in social care. And going back to your point, no, they haven't. What they've done is told councils they can add council tax on to help pay for some of the black hole in social care. They're being completely disingenuous, but if to them it doesn't matter, because it's almost like what the voter engagement is secondary to them. They don't mind. If more people engage, the more difficult it becomes for the Tories and to a lesser extent the Labour Party. And how we deal with that, and one of the things I asked a very cheeky question of the Labour leader, who's an arch Corbynite, absolutely loves him, and I asked him after the general election, I asked the Labour leader in press, and I said, it was about PR and working together and things like that. And I said to him, what would you rather have? A weakened Labour Party or a Tory party that never gets in power on its own again? And he couldn't answer it. He doesn't know, because that logjam in Labour, where they think we have a divine right to be in power, despite the fact the last 100 years they've only really been in power twice. It's very difficult for them to break that. So but having more people engaged and dealing with people who maybe aren't just the political bubbles that we all know that we can fall into sometimes, that's going to expand not just the Lib Dems appeal, but potentially greater engagement, greater community awareness, and all the rest that comes with it.
I think that's really, if I may, I cast that through the lens of this sort of consumer versus citizen, or subject versus consumer versus citizen politics. For the Conservatives, or this Conservative Party, and I think we should make a distinction between this version of it and past versions. This Conservative Party are, as you say, John, like perfectly willing to undermine faith in politics because they know it will manifest in power for them. I think that one of the less talked about, but I think most important findings in the Winning for Britain report, that the first one that Ian and I wrote together, was that something like, in a sort of analysis of the qualitative, the open-ended responses to why did you vote for the Conservatives, the phrase "best of a bad bunch" was the single most sort of frequently cited, some version of that language. And so like their politics is very much a kind of, I would describe it as a consumer politics. We're going, all we need is people to choose us versus the alternatives. Like, there are a set of options, so we need to, and if we do that by undermining people's faith in the others, fine. We have to, you talked about Biden, Monica, and I think it was Dr. Jill Biden who had that phrase, like, who talked about kind of like, and Michelle Obama as well, like several people talked about going high if they go low. And I think that thing of like, so what does it mean to do that? And I think the opportunity of citizen politics, and it also applies to your local government thing, like in a consumer politics frame, you see those things as just service providers, as things that you want to pay as little for as possible, as kind of as sort of branch outlets of the head office of government. If you see in a citizen politics, you're not just trying to force a choice between relatively crap options, forgive my language, for Lib Dem Podcast. I'm not sure what time this goes.
No, it's fine, that's completely, so we've had worse.
Okay,
we've got
checking around
this podcast.
you're, at that level, at vote level, you're not just trying to force a choice between poor options. You're trying to involve and kind of build something together. And at the level of local government, you're not just trying to say, you're not accepting it as a service provider. You're saying, we can make, like, the line I would love to see as many parties, local parties, using as possible is something like, let's make this place better together. Let's make Elmbridge better together. Let's make Kingston better together. Like, that spirit of like, come on, let's do this is something that actually cuts across the sort of the frame and the narrative that says like, pay as little as possible for as much as possible, like that sort of, or to your example of the Labour leader in Preston, it sort of cuts across that. It just makes that so irrelevant, as you say. Like, if you can be saying like, we want an engaged democracy where people are involved and creating a better country together and coming together across those divides, it's a way of stepping up above those sort of internecine unhelpful kind of debates and saying, no, let's get up to something together, and then we can figure out how exactly we relate. And so that's the sort of, is seeing it through that lens of, don't accept politics as a choice between bad options. Insist on politics being a place where we come together to figure out how to do things.
I think that's right. And just picking up on Jon's point earlier, when you say that apathy, is good for the Conservative Party, apathy breeds populism and dangerous politics, and participation breeds the opposite, actually. And if you see what has happened in America, participation breeds hope, and hope always trumps fear. And populism is part of fear. So actually, participation is so important because of that. So the mountain that we have to climb is to engage with people and get participation in local politics so we can change it. Most of the electorate don't subscribe to the tribes that we've created. The terms are meaningless. They're not Conservatives, they're not Lib Dems, they're not Labour Party, they're not Socialists. They're not liberals. They don't know what they are, and they don't care, and they don't want a title, but they need a vision to believe in, and they need some hope to believe in, and that's what we have to provide.
Is there a cultural difference? And I'm going to go back to the Taiwan case study that you bring up, Jon, because like I said, I went to Taipei. My best man ended up marrying a Taiwanese girl, and also I just do a little plug. Taipei is probably one of the greatest cities in the world. It really, if anyone ever gets a chance to go, it really is spectacular. But there's a very definite culture in Taipei. The kind of respect for their area, for their. I mean, you couldn't find a scrap of litter if you tried and it's a capital city. But and Taipei's movement, and it's dealing with coronavirus, which you mentioned before. Not only they had SARS previously, so they've learned. One of the few bad things about going to Taipei is actually getting through customs and the amount of. I mean, this was well before. This was several years ago, and they still do temperature checks and all that sort of stuff straight away. But are we talking about apples and oranges here? Can Britain be like a Taipei, or is it just a completely different culture, the respect kind of culture that they have kind of ingrained in them from such a young age? Or am I being pessimistic?
Go on. Do you want to go, Monica?
No, well, I lived in Japan for 9 years, so I can tell you a little bit about, Far Eastern culture, and it is very different. And mask wearing, if you had a cold or the flu, would happen in the office, naturally. But of course, to a foreigner coming in, that would look completely weird. Of course, now we're all wearing masks, but that collaboration and consensus, and that signing up to an idea is very, very much part of the culture. And I would say it's different. We're a liberal democracy. We fight ideas, we take to the streets, we march, etc., etc. But again, it's believing in an idea, and where an idea takes hold, and it's happened, hasn't it, in the past in this country? The things that we fought for, and the things that we fought against. And so I yes, it is apples and pears, and it depends here, I think, in a liberal democracy, on leadership. It's always leadership.
I think for my part, I would probably say it's not apples and oranges or apples and pears. I'd describe it as maybe Granny Smiths and Egremont Russets or something, some sort of weird. It's Granny Smiths and Pink Ladies. I don't know. So there are. Look, I mean, for a start, I think we are being told, and we have to understand this, we are being told a story about who we are all the time. And at the moment, as you've pointed out several times, that story is being told by the Conservative Party, and has, frankly, for 10 years and only for not 13 years out of the last X. I mean, we were in coalition, but I would argue that the greatest failing we had in coalition was not actually shaping the story sufficiently. We were trapped in the Conservative story, which led to an awful lot of the things that we fought against it and fought valiantly against it, but we were trapped in it. Now think back to when the pandemic first arrived in this country. There was all that talk of herd immunity and needing to let it wash through the country, and a lot of that was rooted in the belief that we were not capable of the kind of sacrifice actually that then ensued. That when lockdown became, like, the government actually was saying people won't follow this advice. There was sort of pride in the weirder parts of the Conservative Party that we are not the sort of nation that would do this. And it's like, but we, like, when lockdown came, remember there were 750,000 people applied for those for the NHS first responder scheme within the first 48 hours, when it was built for 250,000 to apply over 2 weeks or something. The mutual aid networks that sprung up, like that we are not who we are told we are. And I think that sort of came through in that moment. And so while I would accept that Taiwan is, I'd also challenge a little. I don't know. I'm hesitant how far to accept this, because the story of Taiwan.
Tell me I'm wrong. Absolutely, tell me I'm wrong. I share this podcast with Lethal Smart. I get told I'm wrong very often.
No, but I like you, John. I'm gonna, like, we're friends. We're Liberal Democrats. We've got to agree in a disagreeing way, right? Like, but I mean, I guess so. Like, where Taiwan was in 2014. In 2012, actually, was basically pretty much where we are now. There was a very right-wing government that was becoming increasingly influenced by the Chinese, that was about to pass through a trade deal without due kind of due analysis, due scrutiny, and that triggered an Occupy style. Initially in 2012, it actually triggered the emergence of this. They ran ads that said, "Shush, little people," basically, "Shush, little people, just go shopping, leave government to us," which is not dissimilar from sort of "eat out to help out," and that's your bit. And what happened was that among other things, a hacker movement called GovZero emerged and started to actually hack government, like fork, they call it, create replica versions of government websites, which were participatory, which enabled participatory budgeting, only as shadow processes. I love it. They're called GovZero because all of their websites are g0v.tw, so they're the same website, but. And what happened, the energy of that built over a couple of years. And then when it came to this trade deal starting to go through, there was an Occupy style protest. The students occupied the legislature. And the Speaker of the Parliament said, "No, this is an extension of our democracy." The governing party tried to throw them out, tried to force the Speaker to, and he said, "No, this is democracy." And what happened off the back of that was that several of the most senior members of GovZero were actually invited into government departments. A presidential hackathon started that year. So you have this you have this moment of where politics was very much going with the momentum of the 21st century in the same challenges of nationalism and populism and so forth, and then this moment of kind of crisis and saying, no, we're gonna try and do something different. And yet, and so that, and then that's the sort of foundation out of which the very different response to coronavirus came. And also, the last thing I'd say on the sort of, is it different? The reason I would say it's not, it's species of apple or genus of apple, or whatever the word is. My biology is terrible, so I apologize. But the reason why it's more similar than different, I think, and you have to say that, is because if you look across the world, and like Iceland, the Irish referendum on abortion, you have the flat pack democracy movement, which I think that in the UK, which I think the Liberal Democrats need to reach out to and learn from more. You have the Pirate Party in Germany that has some of this, and some of these things are being co-opted in slightly different ways. So Podemos and Barcelona en Comú and things, but they're all sort of manifestations of this idea that a politics that limits the input of the citizen to a choice between options that they haven't had the opportunity to shape every few years is dying. And the new politics will be one where participation is more dynamic, if there is to be a new politics at all. And if we can step into that and shape that, then I think there's an enormous strategic opportunity for the Lib Dems.
There's two bits that I find interesting. I mean, going back to kind of Japan and Taiwan and their response to COVID, I mean, they obviously had a head start because of SARS, and they had a plan to fight, a SARS epidemic rather than a flu epidemic, which obviously held us back here. That and a whole load of incompetence. But what I think is also interesting about what Jon has picked up on is that the government's insistence apparently encouraged by behavioural scientists that we wouldn't want to go into lockdown, and yet we did in great numbers. And this also thinking that we all want to go crazy at Christmas time. And my personal experience is that most people don't want to do that. So I've had both. I've had my mother-in-law and my mother decline invitations to our house for Christmas.
You're very lucky. Oh.
Well, I won't say anything publicly about that. But there is something here where the government is expecting everybody to go crazy for Christmas, but we're pulling back. Now that even means that our behavioural science is wrong, or there's something else going on here, which is, Jon's alluding to, which is about some sense of community or self-care or care for others that is not coming through our politics. And I want to believe the latter, because I do think that we, make decisions based on our community, and we do stop and think, do I want to do that, or would it affect, somebody elderly in the community or somebody vulnerable? So I think we underestimate that, and we do so to our disadvantage as a country and as a society. And again, hope and fear. Can't go on about that enough.
Sorry, one little link. I agree so much with all of that. The only thing I would say is the SARS flu thing, that there's a little bit of a on that, because right at the beginning, like the Public Health England and the Centre for Disease Control in the States responded exactly the same as the Taiwanese for the first week or so. And then there was a political decision actually not to go further. I mean, the Taiwanese published the 150 things they'd already done in an English language journal on March the 3rd, like 9 days before we even went into lockdown. So this stuff was there and available and very public. I mean, Jacinda Ardern said, I am following the Taiwan model. So the idea that there really aren't that many excuses for doing different. But your thing is like that we are, like I said, we are not who we are being told we are. And the opportunity for this country, if we can tell ourselves a story that's truer, is unlimited. Like we could be a wonderful place to live and work and be together if we can do that.
And that kind of leads on to the kind of where we go from now. And I visited Reykjavik and absolutely loved it. It's such an amazing place to go. But the fundamental shift that Reykjavik's had to go through, from particularly in the light of the banking collapse and the credit crunch, and how think they knew they had to change. And I love the quote that's in your book, that's in your report. It says, "We Icelanders realised we couldn't leave the running of the country to a small group of influential people anymore." They just thought, we can't just sit back and drift. And they had to step up and do something. So what would you say to the Lib Dems listening, wherever they are in the country, what can they step up and do to improve things, to get more people engaged? I'll give that to you, Jon, first. Shall I go?
Me first, sorry.
Yeah. I thought he was looking at you.
It's disappointing if we all came to a rousing silence at that point. And this wonderful conversation, then Jon's like, "What's your call to arms?" We're like, "Nah, not got one."
No, not close, no.
I think really, I think you sort of answered your own question, Jon. I think that for me, the thing that we should be going out and saying, and that is deeply true in the philosophy of our party, like we have the quote from Paddy Ashdown on the inside cover of Citizens Britain is called Citizens Britain because Paddy Ashdown wrote a book called Citizens Britain in 1989. His subtitle was A Radical Agenda for the 1990s, so we've just said a radical agenda for the 2020s. But Paddy in that book, and the quote we have in the inside cover is that the thing that kept him in politics, and I'll paraphrase, so I don't have it in front of me because I'm ill prepared. But
yeah, I do. See, I've already.
Do you want to give us it in full, Jon?
No way I can reach Paddy's oratory qualities, though. But it says, "A society cannot be free and is very unlikely to be successful for long unless the men and women in it have real power to determine their own destiny. One thing that unfailingly gives me satisfaction in politics is to watch those who have been taught that they are subject to others' power rise to meet the challenge of power. Rise to meet the challenge of power in their own hands, and then be unbelieving at what they can be able to do."
Yeah, those who are subject to another's power rise to meet the challenge of power in their own hands, and then be unbelieving at what they're able to do. It's just like those words. That is what, to me, liberalism is believing in people. Democracy is power in people's hands. Like, that is who we are. And so if we go out there and we invite people in and say, let's do this together, like, I think we could create something spectacular. And to your thing about Iceland, like, Brexit is that moment. Like, we are being taken probably off the edge, frankly, by this government. But we can build back. We can work it together. But if we respond to that challenge not by saying we will fix it for you, but let's fix it together. Do this with us, not we will do it for you. I think that's the thing I think Liberal Democrats are already doing it because it's who we are anyway. But I would just instill confidence in that natural orientation and say, go out there and invite people to come with us, to come with you, to help you, and offer your help to them.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can't lose the fire in our belly. At the beginning of 2019, I think so many of us were so fed up with what was going on. And, I had a thing that I kept on saying that people then started quoting back to me was that, the reason I decided to step forward is because I got fed up of shouting at the TV. And the local party here in Eastern Walton was tiny, full of brilliant people, but tiny. And we sat around the kitchen table and we just said, we're not prepared to put up with this. And look what happened. We got the biggest swing in the country and smashed the foreign secretary's majority when the tide was going in the opposite direction. So I think there was a kind of feeling that, after the election in January, February, we all wanted to kind of hibernate for a bit. But, look what happened by about April, May. We were all shouting at the TV again. So we have to get back there and we have to ask ourselves, or ask other people that came along with us, not the activists, but the people that came along with us, are you prepared to put up with this? Are you still prepared to put up with this? The fight doesn't end after the first round. The fight goes on until we can get our country back to a state where it is stable again, where we have some kind of consensus politics, where we are all engaged. And that's really where we have to get to. We have to pick up the mantle and we just have to keep on going, keep on keeping on.
Perfect. I think that is all. That I couldn't think of a better way of ending this podcast. So I just want to say thank you both so much for coming on. I've really enjoyed that. It's always good to have a chat about these sorts of things and it's about inspiring. Because, like I say, hat is back on. Thank you very much, Jon.
I've got one.
Okay, go on then.
Right, you're missing out, Jon. Your Technicolor Dream show behind you, mate. It's really showing me up.
But I want to thank you both for coming on. To all our listeners and viewers, you can find Jon on Twitter at Jon J Alex, and you can find Monica at Monica B Harding. And that's B as in B-E Harding.
B-E Harding.
Yeah.
MBE.
Oh, right. Okay, there we go. Yeah. No, but thank you so much for coming on. I've really enjoyed that. If any of you want more information, I do go onto the Social Liberal Forum. If you want to see that report, it's really worth listening. And I really enjoyed it. And it did trigger lots of things, particularly stuff about the Reykjavik thing. I thought, okay, you know, this whole idea of a better Reykjavik, could we have a better Preston? Could we have a better whatever? What can we do to engage? Because it's also, not only is it good for your area, it's good for you politically as well. So all you guys, listen there. And we've had this before on our podcast, when we had the organisers round table, what was the one thing they said to us? You know, successful teams tend to have lots of people doing lots of things. And if you can get more people engaged, you are far more likely to be successful. So thank you very much to Jon and Monica for coming on. Thank you all very much for listening and watching. You can follow everything to do with the Lib Dem Podcast at LibDem Pod. My name is John Potter. We'll have more episodes coming up very soon. So thank you very much for watching.
Happy Christmas.
Happy Christmas. Oh, yeah.
Merry Christmas.
You're making me look bad. Not only have I not got a hat, but I haven't said Happy Christmas either. You're making me terrible.